Hello, everybody. It is Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our Steelers post-game show this week by Christopher Carter in for Paul Zeiss, who is on vacation. We're breaking down a 27-24 Steelers loss to the Colts on Sunday in Indianapolis. A lot to talk about, Chris. I think there were some good things. There were some bad things, and I don't know how I feel about some of the other things. So I'm excited to work through it with you, talk about Justin Fields, talk about this offense, talk about the running game, the offensive line, and, of course, the defense, which gave up 27 points today. Certainly a season high for them. Before we get into the show, just want to thank our primary sponsor, Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. All right, let's get into it, Chris. They score more points than they have all season offensively. They also lose. They looked, I think, as bad as they have at all season at times today on some drives, and then they kind of pour it on late. What's your overall read on? I guess we'll start with the offense, and then we can tackle the defense.
So if I'm starting with the offense, I have to be very encouraged by what Justin Fields is doing. I know some people want to put it on him because he did have a fumble in this game, and there was the bad snap at the end. I don't think the snap was on him. Clearly, Zach Frazier snapped it while the rest of the offensive line was still all talking. That happens, I think, with a road environment, big situation. I think that as our reporters are in the locker room, they're probably getting that from Frazier himself right now, that was that there. But you have to be encouraged by Justin Fields. 22 of 34 for 312 passing yards, a touchdown, no interceptions, did have that fumble. But also when you look at the second half, 3 straight touchdown drives in the half. And the only one in the fourth quarter that wasn't a touchdown drive was set back by the bad snap that set them in 2nd and 22. So I look at Justin Fields, and if I'm Mike Tomlin, 3 touchdowns, also 2 rushing touchdowns, 55 yards on the ground on 10 carries. I have to be very encouraged by that. I think the Steelers really saw really good play from him and the offense. George Pickens, we're going to talk about that fumble. That was probably the biggest mistake on this part. I think the biggest thing here, and I know a lot of people, defense could have been better, but I think the biggest thing that hurt the Steelers in this game were their own mistakes. They did not. You look at the Colts' first 3 scoring drives in this game when they went up 17-0 or 17-3. When you look at the scoring, they were up 17-0 at one point. The first drive, Joey Porter misses an easy interception that was right in front of him. He mistimed the jump, misplayed it on the first play of the game. Second drive, Deshaun Elliott strips Anthony Richardson. Patrick Queen's right there to recover the fumble, doesn't pick it up. Colts will go on to score that drive. Third drive, Colts get a short field. They get a field goal out of it after Joey Porter drops another interception opportunity. That's 17 points that you could have wiped out right there with turnovers by a defense, and that would have flipped this game completely around. And then on the offensive side, you get a George Pickens fumble inside the 5-yard line. You have Zach Frazier's bad snap. I think you look at that. All in all, like, those mistakes define the game. I know people early on were saying, oh, Mike Tomlin's being out-schemed. The scheme part of the game went away after about like a quarter and a half. This came down to when both teams had kind of adjusted to each other, who would make more mistakes. And at the end, the Steelers did. The Colts didn't.
Here's my rub. I'm just going to start with Tomlin and Arthur Smith and the coaching, and then we can kind of move on to individual players. My problem with this is that you've got an inexperienced offensive line. You've got an offensive line that's dealing with a fair amount of injuries, and yet these guys seem so committed to the bit of winning the game 4 yards at a time until they had no other choice in that fourth quarter than to kind of cut things loose a little bit and see what happens. You're going to run into these drives that short circuit with just small mistakes and runs for a loss. If you take one 3-yard loss on a run on some of these drives, Chris, just the way that they're calling the plays conservatively, it feels like the drive's almost over or sometimes early in the game. We saw late in the game why that is not strictly necessary. And I get that they want to have an identity. I get that they want to play mistake-free football and kind of pound teams into submission. But today you're down 17-0 and still kind of dedicated to the bit.
7.2 yards per carry for Cordarrelle Patterson, though, before he gets injured. I hear you. I think that there's times they were a little too conservative, but the run game did start to work, and then it short-circuited. Also, James Daniels going out. They're the only two linemen they even pay on this team, both out of this game. I hear you. I think that they could let Justin Fields open it up a little sooner, but again, I think that to me, like George Pickens holds on to the ball inside the 5. We're not talking about that because the Steelers offense would have at least gotten a field goal in the drive, probably would have gotten a touchdown the way they were moving the ball from that drive on. I agree to an extent, but I don't think that's close to if I'm listing a degree of things that were important, that's 7th maybe on the list.
So, I mean, certainly the turnovers decided the game and the mistakes decided the game. I think my point is you're putting yourself in a position where, mistakes can short circuit you because you're trying to thread such a tight needle. So I think that's my criticism. I'd also, just to counterpoint the Cordarrelle Patterson, I believe I wrote this down in my notes going into the fourth quarter. Najee Harris had 10 runs for 9 yards.
Yeah, he ended with 13 for 19. The Colts were certainly selling out to stop him. But again, when the Steelers figured out, hey, this is what they're trying to do, they were able to run the ball a little bit more. They were selling out to stop Najee Harris. Patterson averaging over 7 yards per carry. Even Champlin got a 5-yard run. Justin Fields over 5.5 yards. So pretty much everyone except Najee Harris ran the heck out of the ball. And we also saw Najee Harris when he got the ball in space and the Colts didn't have 4 defenders around him. He averaged 22 yards per touch on 54 yards. What's 54 divided by 3? A lot of yards when he got the ball in space when he caught it. So I don't think that's the thing I'm harping on today. I'm looking at crucial mistakes at crucial times by the players.
Certainly there is that. Let's talk about Najee a little bit before we get into some of the Justin Fields conversation, because I've already seen it get kind of polarized in the chat. Listen, again, with the offensive line, and you're right, the defensive game plan was to stop him, but that's going to be the game plan for many teams, Chris. I mean, that is going to be the strategy that many teams down the line take. And at this stage of his career, don't you want to see him overcome to some extent? I'm not expecting 100 yards from him today, but I'm expecting more than a yard per carry going into the fourth quarter. Overcoming a little bit individually with a little bit more elusiveness.
Did you see a play where he had all this space? I mean, most of his runs, he was getting hit 2, 3, 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage and managing what he could. I think it's a common narrative. People just don't look at the film and they're just like, oh, he's bad. And I think that's not accurate. I think that you look at it, and again, it would be the case if when he got the ball and there wasn't 3 defenders in his face that he didn't average 20 yards per touch on those plays. So I think that pointing the finger at Najee Harris, I think he actually played well considerably. I think the offensive line, if we're looking at any group on offense that deserves most of the blame in this game, I would put it on the O line, who had good moments but also had bad moments.
I think my issue with that, Chris, is that the offensive line is obviously going to be a liability in some ways, and that it can't be the excuse for everyone else. And you have to grade everyone with an expectation that there's going to be inconsistency. What'd you say?
What excuses were given? I said that they played a bad game. That's not giving an excuse.
I'm not saying you're giving the excuse. I'm just saying, generally speaking, that these guys, there has to be a level of understanding that other people are going to have to compensate for this offensive line on some level. I mean, do you think that that's fair?
I mean, yes, but that's when Najee Harris averages 20 yards per catch. I don't know where you're getting at, man. If we're saying yes, are there things they can do to mitigate having a rookie guard, a rookie center, a second-year offensive tackle? Yeah, sure. And they scored 3 touchdowns in a row in the second half, and the only time they didn't score a touchdown in the fourth quarter was when their rookie center snapped the ball early on a play when they were moving the ball pretty well. So I think that there's other things other people can do. George Pickens cannot fumble inside the 5. That's another thing. I thought Pat Freiermuth played pretty well. Maybe you can get the ball to Darnell Washington a bit more. He averaged 16 yards a touch when he caught passes in this game. But again, it's hard for me to get mad at the offensive game plan when you look at 2 turnovers to none, when you look at the huge mistakes the Steelers made on the field that really defined the game.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't disagree with that. I just like to, focus in on some of these guys a little bit and say, what are the Steelers getting from them? Let's focus on Justin Fields. Let's get into that conversation a little bit, because I think he is kind of the personification of the day for the team. He has the fumble, he has the snap late that gets away from him, but then he also was, I think, the MVP of this game for the offense, making plays when a lot of other people were not. Was this his best game in defeat, Chris, of the season?
I think actually that's a very good observation. I think, yes, it was his best game, even though they lost. But I think that's part of what Justin Fields has been showing. And this is what I really think a lot of people should take note of about Justin Fields right now. He has gotten better with each game. Like, I think his decision-making, he's been quicker, he's been more accurate, he's been more confident. And that, to me, is worth a lot if I'm the Steelers right now, because he's a young quarterback. You wanted to kind of erase what his mistakes were in Chicago, and make him not a mistake guy, off a guy who made a lot of, had a lot of turnovers in Chicago. You've wiped that out. Training camp, preseason, start of the season. I think you've done that. And now you're starting to see him make really good plays. And I think also encouraging when you look at something else about Justin Fields, even beyond just the raw stats or things like that. You look back at how he's responded to his mistakes. And because that's, to me, was a big problem in Chicago. When Justin Fields used to throw an interception or have a fumble, it would compound upon itself, and you would just see him spiral. Last week, he throws an interception in the third quarter that halts a Steelers drive. After that, leads a field goal drive and the game-winning touchdown to really seal the game after that. The next 2 drives this week, after the fumble at midfield, that, unblocked blitzer came on an overload blitz. He didn't see it in time, and then he compounded that with a mistake. He doesn't let that build off of it. After his fumble, he has 3 straight touchdown drives of 56, 70, and 70 yards. I think he showed, hey, I can manage these situations very well. That's maturity. That's positive growth. I think Justin Fields is doing that. And I know there's a lot of people in the chat talking about, he should be the starter. I do think he should be QB1 right now because of the progress that he's making. I have to be encouraged of how far he could take this trajectory.
What do you think the conversation is going to be like this week, Chris? Because obviously we're getting into the Russell Wilson conversation. I think a lot of us were of the opinion that as long as Justin Fields is winning, it's going to be hard to take him out. He doesn't win this week, but I think a lot of people say he did more good than bad. Where do you go from here narratively? If you're Mike Tomlin, does the loss lay the predicate to go to Russell Wilson, or is it still a very complicated decision? Because I think it should be.
I think it is very complicated. Because here's the other thing. I think Russell Wilson still, when I say I think Justin Fields should be QB1, it's not because I think Russell Wilson's bad. It's because I think Justin Fields is showing some really good growth game in and game out. And it's tough to take the ball out of his hands when you're seeing that. But I'd still think you put Russell Wilson in, he doesn't have the rushing touchdowns in this game, but maybe he makes a couple of those, maybe he handles some of those overload blitzes a lot sooner. You know what? Like, there were several times early in this game where I felt like there should have been a check at the line by Justin when the Colts were showing blitz and, you could see it and they still ran into the TV. That's less on just needing to just chuck the ball and needing to be saying, hey, let's come in from that way. Let's run it this way. Or, you know what, that's what they're doing there. Let's do a quick little screen pass. Let's have those. And I think with Russell Wilson, he would be more comfortable doing those because of his veteran experience in the NFL. Just mean that's purely speculation. But if you're looking for something to say maybe Russell Wilson would do better than Justin Fields, you could point to that. But again, I don't think that's enough to stop what's going on right now. 3 straight touchdowns this week from Justin Fields, a passer rating of over 100. And passer rating is not like, the end all be all of anything, but 300 passing yards in this game. And again, if George Pickens doesn't fumble inside the 5, maybe he has a 4th touchdown on his register and maybe the Steelers win the game. If Zach Frater's going to have a bad snap that really wasn't on Justin Fields, I actually thought it was remarkable that Justin Fields scooped that ball up and kept the drive alive after that. And also threw a decent ball on the second down pass that I thought should have been defensive holding at the least. I mean, even the announcers were like, wow, George Pickens just being mugged up the sideline. All in all, I can't be, if I'm grading Justin Fields off of raw without watching all 22, I'm giving him at least a B to a B plus, because I thought he managed this game very well.
If we're talking about compensating for this offensive line and the state of it right now for various different reasons, I just have a hard time thinking that going to a less mobile Russell Wilson, and that's what he is. I mean, is he more mobile than some quarterbacks in the NFL? Absolutely, but you're going to go to a less mobile guy than you have out there right now. Mike Tomlin has stressed the mobility thing. Does Russell Wilson have the ability to hide the warts that this offensive line has the way Justin Fields has to this point? Because I think that's my biggest concern until you get some consistency with this offensive line in terms of personnel, in terms of performance. All of it.
No, sorry. What's the question there?
Can you really? Is Russell Wilson going to be a liability behind this offensive line?
I think he's going to be a different kind of a liability. I think Justin Fields can escape it with his feet. I think Russell Wilson can escape it, can more so call out the right adjustments to know where to be at the right times. I think that's where, if Russell Wilson was to make up for it, it wouldn't be because he can naturally just get out of it. I think that like for example, on the field sack where he fumbled the ball at the 50-yard line and everything looked rough in the third quarter. I think on that play, like on that play, that was a DB blitz off the right side. And Fields didn't see it until it was way too late. I think on that play, Russell Wilson said, "Hey, DB, coming over here." I mean, he was showing his hand that play. I think he's like, "Hey, DB, coming over here. Let's either adjust the protection or we're adjusting the play. Quick pass to the left here instead of trying to set something else up so that I at least have time to make a play there." Those are the things that I think Russell Wilson could do to negate not being as mobile as Justin Fields. But again, if I'm looking at this game, I'm not pointing the finger at Justin Fields and saying, "You lost me this game." I'm pointing and saying, "Hey, young buck, keep doing what you're doing because I like what I see."
We're going to get into the receivers here now. I'd like to talk a little bit about the offensive line, but I also want to talk about the receivers. Pickens obviously has the massive fumble, but he also goes for 7 for 113. Yeah. So I think, you look at George Pickens and say more good than bad today. But then beyond him, I believe I wrote this down that going into I didn't write down the timestamp, but I think it was with 6 minutes left. They had targeted receivers not named George Pickens exactly one time. In the final box score, it is Van Jefferson gets 2 targets, two catches on 3 targets. Calvin Austin has 1 on 1. So that's 3 catches on 4 targets for all the receivers. And most of that production came like very, very late in the game. What's your read on this receivers room as a whole? Was it the game plan? Was it these guys are just not getting open?
It's tough to say without all 22, say that they weren't getting open. I think Calvin Austin looked pretty solid whenever you've gotten him the ball so far this season. But I also think it's part of this offense to feed your tight ends. Because look, Darnell Washington had 2 catches for 31 yards as the number 2 tight end. Cordell Patterson, 2 catches for 19 yards. If he doesn't get hurt, maybe he gets more. Najee Harris, 3 catches, 54 yards. Pat Fryermuth, 5 catches, 57 yards and a touchdown. I think that's part of the Arthur Smith offense, like at Tennessee. Tennessee didn't have prolific receivers. They had like one good one and then like a bunch of meh guys. But you made up for it with good tight end play, good running back play, and solid decision-making from a quarterback that wasn't being asked to do too much. And I think that's very much what they did once they got into this game, Adam. I think that's encouraging. Now, could the Steelers use more production for wide receiver? Absolutely. But I think in this game, it's not what cost them. I think that you look at those guys, I'm okay with their effort. It's not like they dropped big passes. The biggest mistake from the receivers room in this game was Pickens, fumble inside the 5. But you're right. Other than that, I thought he was prolific. I mean, it was I forget how long of a pass it was, maybe a 38-yarder. The down the sideline throw on the touchdown drive. The last touchdown drive the Steelers had was a great throw from Justin Fields, a great route from George Pickens, and a great catch there. So I think that's all in all, I'm okay with the receivers. Could they use another one? Yep, but I'm not sure if a playmaking wide receiver 2 is what wins the Steelers this game.
Yeah, I think this game is a good way to kind of focus the conversation, but there has to be a happy medium to me, Chris, between yes, you want to deploy these 3 tight end sets. You want to get that personnel on the field, which is naturally going to limit, the production of the receivers, and 1 target for guys not named George Pickens until late in the game. There's got to be something between those 2 points. Mm-hmm. And we haven't seen it so far other than, that great game by Calvin Austin last week.
Yeah. I mean, you want to see more production from your wide receiver too. But I mean, if you're telling me I'm getting over 300 passing yards with Justin Fields and your receivers only caught no receiver got more than 21 yards after George Pickens, I'd ask myself, okay, how did you make that happen? And can you keep making that happen at a more consistent pace? And I think the Steelers can. I think Pat Freiermuth is a real weapon. I think you saw that when you got the ball in his hands this week. Najee Harris, when you get him in space, he's dangerous. Cordero Patterson, when you get him in space, he's dangerous. And Darnell Washington, I said this last year when he was a rookie. I'm like, why are they not throwing the guy this ball fades on the goal line, just get him in space, dump it down to him. And twice you saw in this game, if you got the ball to him, he was getting extra yards after the catch. I think that certainly you could get more help out of the wide receivers, but I'm not harping that. Right now, if I'm the Steelers, I'm not getting on the phone and trading the farm for, another playmaker wide receiver. If you get a deal that favors you, sure, go ahead and take it. But don't sell the farm for that right now. I think you're still 3-1 and on top of your division right now.
Chris, the early reports are James Daniels is in a walking boot.
That's not good. And
crutches. So that certainly doesn't sound good for being around next week. Certainly, we don't know a whole lot about the long term. We'll keep an eye on that. But I mean, what level of loss would James Daniels be for this offensive line if he's forced to miss substantial time? Because the Pro Football's focus grades, Chris, have him as one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL, not just one of the best offensive linemen on the Steelers. I mean, he's playing really great football right now, and he's kind of been an anchor for a group that has otherwise been inconsistent in terms of the personnel that's been deployed and how that personnel is played when it's been on the field.
Well, play the lottery, because for once in a while, PFF grades got something right, because they're terrible, but they are accurate there. James Daniels has been very good for the Steelers to start the season. I think that's it's a big blow if he's gone for a long time. I think the one thing you got to hope for if you're the Steelers is Isaac Seumalo going to be able to play next week. He's been getting closer and closer with practicing and getting things ready, and I think that we're approaching the window that Jerry Dulac talked about would be the window when he first got injured. So if he can come back soon, that'll be huge, because then Isaac Seumalo, I think, is better than James Daniels, and then you could put Mason McCormick at right guard and let him go from there. But certainly losing Daniels, big blow, no doubt about it. If you're the Steelers, you have to hope that he can be back in, he doesn't have to go to IR. If he can come back in a few weeks, that's big.
Do you think it's possibly a good thing long term that so many of these guys are getting chances to get in games and get some experience, and understanding the way that the Steelers want to play? Because I think that's the only positive I can take away from what's going on with the offensive line right now, is that at least you're getting looks at some of these guys, and at least they aren't like individually completely overwhelmed. I mean, you feel good about some of these guys having a long-term future. It's just kind of tough to watch right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's still up to them. Like, if they end up being bad, then it is not good that they got all this experience, because they should have been playing better players. But certainly, I mean, it's going to be up to these guys to be able to say, hey, I'm taking advantage of it. Like, for example, Zach Frazier had a bad snap that I think ultimately cost the Steelers this game, but I think he's been a very good center. I think that he's shown a lot of potential, and I like the direction that he's going with his career. I think Broderick Jones has shown improvement over the last two games. I think Mason McCormick, I have to look closer. There were some times I felt like he was getting beat at the wrong point. But all in all, I'm encouraged by what I've seen from this team, from this offensive line, the young offensive line. For the most part, they have a lot of cleanup, but that's kind of natural. So this could end up working in their favor with all this experience. If at the end of this season, you're looking at Broderick Jones playing really well, Zach Frazier playing really well, and then like Mason McCormick being your first guard off the bench for and he plays well in replacement of Seumalo or Daniels. So certainly it could work out that way.
I want to talk a little bit about the officials, Chris, because there were several controversial calls in this game. There's been a lot of talk in the chat. We just are now getting to it. There's the roughing the passer on the first drive that went in the Steelers' favor, that was questioned on the broadcast. Then you have the late hit on Spencer Anderson. Then the unnecessary roughness call on Minkah Fitzpatrick in the third quarter. I think all three. I don't think it was what cost the Steelers the game. I think it went both ways, but there was talk about this officiating crew going into it, how they throw a ton of flags, and it really did feel like these guys like to insert themselves in the game.
I certainly felt that way when when I was looking at this at this game. I thought if there's anyone complaining about the Justin Fields roughing the passer call, blame the rule book, because that was textbook. You don't drive the quarterback into the ground. That's what you wrote the rule book for. Tom Brady got those protections for years. Now all of a sudden you don't want to apply them. Okay, have fun with that. That's bogus. Now I do think if you want to have gripes here, I thought the Spencer Anderson late hit was a good call. He was trying to peel off the pipe. You can't make that mistake there. But if you're a Steelers fan, you certainly have gripes with this game. Not just there was not just the Minkah Fitzpatrick unnecessary roughness call, but the play before that, when Cam Heyward had Joe Flacco wrapped up inside the pocket, he throws the ball to nobody, and it should be intentional grounding, but it's not. The play before that wasn't intentional grounding because he broke outside the tackle box, but on that play, he was inside the tackle box and there was nobody around. That should have been intentional grounding. That would have made it, second and 20 or something like that. It would have been a really big penalty, and then the next play that also moved the ball for the Colts, and it was the first time they had really gotten any movement in the second half, was a penalty that shouldn't have been, and Minkah Fitzpatrick played it perfectly. Even Gene Steratore said on the broadcast, he hit shoulder to shoulder. He was running to close on a deep ball downfield on a really fast wide receiver. That's what you have to do. So terrible call there. I also thought on the play after Zach Frazier's bad snap, and even the broadcast was acknowledging it, that George Pickens was just holding him the whole way down the field. He's like, you're not going to make a big play here. And if not pass interference, it should have been 5 yards, automatic first down on defensive holding call. If you're looking at this, I think there's other points you could say the Steelers got a couple favors here, but I think there's if we're doing on the election where they say definitely leans this way or definitely leans that way, I think it was a slight lean for the Colts in this one as far as the officiating and some crucial points that really helped. But again, if you're the Steelers, you can't look at that. You got to look at fumbling inside the 5, bad snap, and Zach Frazier bad snapping to Justin Fields has been a theme that they need to solve. You look at not being able to run the ball consistently. You look at not adjusting quick enough, I thought, in the first half to get some stops, eventually making the adjustments and dominating. But then 2 dropped interceptions, missing the fumble recovery, all big play opportunities. If they make one of those big plays, the 2 interceptions, the fumble recovery, they make one of those plays, they might win this game.
Yeah, it certainly was frustrating to see. You're right. There were plays that definitely went the Colts' way and overall, but I just hate to see it on either way when they insert themselves, and they make it an ump show. That's not what people are paying to see. I also wanted to ask you about, before we get into the defense, the 4th and 1 call when the Steelers were down 14-0. They go for it on their own side of the field, don't get it. What did you think of going for it there? Listen, I understand you want to change momentum. You don't want to get buried, and you were worried about the flow of the game. But also, if you trust this defense, don't you kick the ball there? Isn't it the theory, the Mike Tomlin theory, to play a conservative game where you put it in the hands of your defense? That put them in a bad position, and they end up giving up the 3 points that ends up being the difference in the game.
I think yes and no, because at the same time, I think Mike Tomlin gets blamed for being too conservative, and then when he's not conservative, it's a problem. I think the big problem on that play, I thought I saw Justin Fields hesitate when he had a rushing lane, but when he hesitated, then the linebacker was like, "Oh, that's what's going on," and he hit the lane. If Najee Harris not Najee Harris, I just read a comment. If Justin Fields just plows forward and doesn't try to think too much on that QB draw, it's a first down, and we're not even talking about this. Those are the things that I'm looking at there. The call itself, a QB draw out of the shotgun, say what you want. Just as a precursory look, when I looked at the replay that they showed on the broadcast, I thought there was a rushing lane that Justin Fields just mistakenly didn't take because he thought a little too long. But again, I'm not blaming Justin Fields for too much in this game when you score 3 touchdowns and in succession and do a really good job there.
Let's get into the defense. Before we do, just want to thank another sponsor. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky & White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Chris, before we get into the big picture about the defense, I did want to note this is 2 weeks in a row that they've basically just gotten shoved down the field on the first drive of the game, and kind of put, the offense and the whole concept of getting ahead and pounding teams into submission. They put them behind the 8 ball. Is that individually a concern beyond the points they gave up today, the yardage they gave up today? Is that the way the intensity just hasn't seemed to be there on the first drive these past couple of weeks?
I don't know if it's intensity. I think it's teams. You always come out with a plan on offense, and because you look at what the defense likes to do and you try to counter it. And I think one thing that the Colts did, I think I'd have to take a closer look at it, but I felt like the Colts were calling a different pace of how they tried to move the ball. They took that big shot in the first down. Again, if Joey Porter catches an interception, we're not even talking about this. But I think that when you look at how things adjusted throughout the game, yeah, sure, like on the first drive, they moved the ball on them, but in the first couple drives, they moved the ball on them. But again, I think it was more so a different pace, and it's been consistently like, okay, that's what they're doing this game. That's not what they were doing before. Now we adjust to what we're seeing, and then the defense plays lights out. They allowed -5 yards in the second half last week. I think, as per the usual, this Terrell Austin defense with Mike Tomlin, they've been very good at making second half adjustments. They come out in the first half, and for those two games, yeah, sure, they moved the ball on those, but against the Falcons, they looked pretty solid to start the game. I think against the Broncos, they looked pretty solid to start the game. It's just the give and flow of the NFL. Some weeks you're making all the stops early on. Some weeks the offense is winning. The other teams get paid to play too. It's not a lack of fire. I think that the Colts just had a good plan to start, but I think the Steelers quickly adjusted to it late or mid second quarter, and that's why really after that the only touchdown they gave up was on the drive where they had a non-call that should have sent the drive back, and then a bogus call that freed up the drive for the Colts.
One thing our Ray Fittipaldo was noting a lot on Twitter was the lack of pressure on Flacco in the second half, and how that allowed him, with his very limited mobility, to kind of sit back and do just enough to pick the Steelers apart for the points they needed to win the game. Do you think that Alex Highsmith is somewhat underappreciated? This is how I'll ask the question, because I've seen a lot of people in the comments saying that they want to see more Nick Herbig. And on one level, I don't blame them. He's played very well. But I think what you saw was when you don't have that third guy and you don't have the ability to just keep coming and coming, that it does hurt this pass rush. It hurts TJ Watt because it forces more attention in his direction when you don't have to worry about Alex Highsmith. And I think it exposes maybe Nick Herbig over a bigger sample size. And what's your read on the importance of Alex Highsmith and his absence in this game?
I think Alex Highsmith, like you said, people underappreciate that guy. Look, it's funny. It's very similar to Jaylen Warren. I think that people see spurts where Nick Herbig comes in spots and isn't necessarily game planned for as much by opposing offensive lines, and he makes big plays. And that's not a deterrent. That's not a demerit for him. That's a really good sign that he's there. But I think that just because he does that doesn't mean that Alex Highsmith is doing anything bad. I think also Alex Highsmith is out there. The Colts don't nearly run the ball as well early on because Alex Highsmith is a good pass rusher. He's a very good edge run defender. And that's where I think the Steelers missed him the most in this game, was he would have collapsed a lot. There was a reverse the Colts got where Nick Herbig was just way out of position because I think he went chasing after the quarterback on the play. But normally, like, I've seen Alex Highsmith react to that play at least 5 or 6 times over his career and be right in position. Like, nope, I'm staying deep as the deepest man. Reverse is coming my way. I'm there. So, that I do think it is a sign that Alex Highsmith is a bit underappreciated when Steelers fans are like, just put Herbig out there. I think, yeah, rotate Herbig in, but still keep Alex Highsmith out there. There's a reason he has a big contract.
Chris, what's your overall level of concern for this unit? Is this one you maybe write off as just one of those games that you're not going to hold opponents to 10 points or fewer every time out there, or were there things that big picture concerned you moving forward?
I mean, I think one thing is, the Colts did move the ball well against the zone defense, and maybe you could have switched to man a little bit sooner. But also at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is they got to capitalize on the mistakes that on making turnovers and making big plays. Again, 2 missed interceptions from Joey Porter Jr. A missed fumble recovery when they had that. Cam Heyward could have brought Joe Flacco on the play that should have been also intentional grounding. And then there's no need for them to worry about intentional grounding. So in spots, yeah, sure. But you know what? Like, if you go back in 2008 and you look at the Steelers defensive time, or 2005, last 2 times they've won a Super Bowl and they've had great defenses, you could see, mistakes here and there too. I wouldn't put too much stock into it. let's see how they rebound against a talented Cowboys team next week.
We've had some comments about Joey Porter Jr., so I just wanted to ask you about him individually. You mentioned the dropped interceptions. The Colts' number one receiver goes off for what did Michael Pittman have? 6 catches, 113 yards, 18.8 per 9 targets. So what was your read of Joey Porter's individual performance today?
Some of those weren't on him necessarily because there was zone coverage, and it was kind of just finding the right spot. But I did think that he did not have a good game. I mean, again, two missed interception opportunities. Definitely got beat on some of those routes, and there was times where he wasn't man and was losing in those routes. Disappointing for him because I think he's been a very good player for the most part for the Steelers, and the Steelers are hoping that he turns into a true number one lockdown corner. He was not today. Can he still get to be? Absolutely. I think he has a world of potential, but I think he's one of those young players that needs to keep their head. I thought it was interesting. Aditi Kinkawala from the broadcast brought this up. Not flipping for defense, but just quickly on this. After the Justin Fields sack fumble turnover, she said that Broderick Jones went to the bench, like threw his helmet, was furious, kicked the bench. He was just so mad at himself, at the team, at just their failures at that point. And it was Pat Freiermuth who came over and said, "Hey, let's lock in, let's focus, keep your head. We need to stay focused. Don't let this get to you." And I think there's times where maybe you could use that for a Joey Porter Jr. in those situations. Though I guess he didn't make egregious bad mistakes, but I think also there might have been, I think it was at least one of the touchdowns, I felt like he miscommunicated. I think it was the second touchdown they had, because I remember Patrick Queen being like, "Why are you in the flat when Bean Bishop's in the flat? We had that there. This was your man. You were supposed to stay on Josh Downs." So certainly some concerns, but I think it's just, hey, young guy, things happen, road environment. You got to wash it, get beyond it, and move forward to the next game.
Let's wrap things up here on this question. Chris, you end this section of the schedule. First quarter of the season is in the books. You're well, I guess it's not strictly a quarter anymore because it's not a 17 game schedule, but just for the sake of argument, I think we all looked at this as one kind of section of the schedule, because then now you're going to get into the night games. You're going to get into playing the Dallas Cowboys next week. I think a lot of people would have taken 3-1 when you started the season, especially given that you lose Russell Wilson at quarterback and some of the dysfunction you've had along the offensive line. Are you still feeling pretty good about where this team is? And was it important to play that fourth quarter? Because I had kind of a different show prepped, and then they did a lot of good things, and it kind of muddied the waters a little bit in terms of what you should take away. And I look at it and I say they haven't gotten destroyed like they did early at different points last season. They came back in this game, and you felt that they could. There were times last season, Chris, when they would fall behind, you'd be like, this game's over, just because they didn't have the ability. So the fact that they did today, I think, is a positive. Where are you looking at things big picture?
I'm looking at big picture, like you said, through a quarter of play, you're 3-1. If they keep up this pace, they would be 12-4 by game 17. That, on my mind, would put them in division race talks. It would put them, in maybe not number one. It depends on how the Chiefs do moving forward. They're losing 10-0 to the Chargers right now. But I think if they maintain this kind of pace, they could do that. Now, things do get, a little bit different. You got some night games. You got Aaron Rodgers, though he doesn't look too good. The Broncos, a team that I think that a lot of people said, oh, they're terrible. They've won their 2 games after playing the Steelers. And I think against decent teams. But I look at the Steelers right now, and I think that if you're upset that they let this win get away, sure, because you know what, if they had won this game, it would be an even bigger lead on the AFC North than it already is. But I like you. If I'm being realistic about the path of their schedule, I think that they're at the right pace at 3-1. And if they keep this up, I think they could be 3-1 in the next stretch of 4 games. And at that point, you're 6-2, and you're really happy with that start. And then you get to the division games in the second half of the season. And once you get there, I think the Steelers, they've done well against the division, and this division doesn't look too scary right now. The Ravens, I think they'll eventually figure it out. But like the Bengals, they won today, barely against the Panthers. I thought that was I think they've looked pretty bad. They're 1-3. Their defense is terrible. I think that you could do some stuff there. The Browns, they're up 10-0 on the Raiders, but they've been a joke so far, 1-2 with a loss to the Giants. So I look at that and I think, I think that the Steelers, if they maintain this pace, that end of this, that second half of the schedule of the season isn't as daunting as everyone made it out to be. Eagles might still be a problem. Chiefs will definitely still be a problem, especially because the Steelers just don't win in Philly. It's like a curse. But all in all, like, I think that you have to be happy about the pace of this team. You know, you're upset about the loss for sure, but if they bounce back the way that they look like they could, I mean, even in this game, it wasn't like they got destroyed. They just lost out, you know, barely by some mistakes here and there. This is still a Steelers team that I think could be in the AFC North race by, you know, late December.
And you still have, you know, the bulk of your home schedule. These were 3 road games. You get
yes.
two out of the 3 road games, I think, was probably the biggest development because it was so road heavy to start. And if you had a concern about this first half of the schedule, that was it. Was that, you know, it would have been easy to go on the road and fall into a bit of a hole, but they've avoided that. So I think, you know, net positives, the way they lost this game, I think you can take enough away from it and say they're still building, and then this offense is still getting better and still hasn't hit its ceiling yet. And I think that's very important. So, Chris, do you want to tease anything on the North Shore Drive tomorrow before we wrap up?
Well, you know, we'll have Ray Fittipaldo on. We'll be, you know, going through the game, talking about this. I want to talk more about Ray, about how he thinks that Justin Fields is handling things, because, you know, we can see things on the broadcast, but I want to see what he saw on the sideline. How did Justin Fields maintain everything after the fumble? Because one big thing about Justin Fields that would really go in his favor is if his leadership is on point. Like, if he's a guy that rallies the offense, that will go a long way to him being the starter, not just this year, but for however long he wants to stay in Pittsburgh. And I want to hear from Ray about how he feels about how Justin Fields managed that, or if he didn't manage it and it was just, hey, he just made plays and that's what it was. But we're going to talk about that on the North Shore Drive. We're going to look at this defense. We're going to say, hey, what went wrong this game? Can they shore up some things to make sure it doesn't carry over? But all in all, again, you know, I think that you're looking at a tough loss from the Steelers in a road game, but a tough loss that sent them to 3-1 and still first place in the AFC North.
Well, make sure you're subscribed for that. Add us to your channel list so you get our Steelers Talk Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from Chris. I'll be back on Thursday with Paul Zeiss. I'll also be back next week after the Steelers-Cowboys game at Acrisure Stadium. Late night for us, but we'll be here, so make sure you're signed up. Make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And other than that, we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.